edition of the Vine Resources podcast show. I'm delighted today to have with me Andy Bryant. Andy is the managing director of RedBee. He's also the co-author with Charlie Moore of the book, The TV Brand Builders. Thank you for joining me, Andy.
You're welcome.
And it's delightful to be in your office here in West London. I wonder if you can just share with our audience a little bit of background about RedBee, and I'd love to hear a bit about how the book came about as well.
Well, on our website, you'll see we talk of ourselves as being the content and design agency born in entertainment. Mm-hmm. And what do we mean by that? Well, there are lots of creative agencies in the UK and globally, but we believe nobody has our backstory. We started life a long time ago as actually part of the BBC in London, and our predecessors were the people who created the promotional trailers and created brand identities for the BBC's channels. It got set up as a commercial business, and then fast forward to today, where we work all over the world, primarily with TV and media companies, creating campaigns, launching shows, creating brand identities, and increasingly working with lots of non-media brands like, for example, Nissan recently, brands that want to learn from how entertainment brands create their marketing.
And tell me a little bit about the background of the book. I mean, I've had a look at the book, The TV Brand Builders. I know you co-authored it with Charlie Moore. How did that come about?
Charlie and I have worked together for many years. He's the exec creative director here at RedBee. And we would, I think like most big projects, they get talked about for years, don't they? And never ever get either attempted or off the ground. But early in 2015, we just had a chat in January, the first week of January, and said, either we're going to write this book or this year, or it's never going to happen. And actually, the key thing for us was we wanted to talk a little bit about our own experiences creating TV channels like Dave, working with, creating the BBC One identity, working with Universal Channel. But more importantly, we wanted to capture global best practice, and to do that, we went to talk to 50 of the world's leading TV brand builders. We talked to CMOs and creative directors from the major networks and channels and media companies in Europe, particularly in the US, and we really learned from them and talked about their case studies.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you for that, and let's just jump straight into the questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
What does a typical day in the business look like for you as managing director?
I'm not sure there is a typical day, really. I think interestingly on that point, our exec creative director, Charlie Moore, and I always do an end-of-year chat with our team. And the one we did a few weeks ago, just before Christmas, in that chat, Charlie said, one of the things I love about my job is that I really don't know what I'm going to be doing next week. And that he was making the point in relation to 2018 and what 2018 holds for us. And I think that is one of the things that really characterises this kind of company. Mm-hmm. It's the infinite variety and unpredictability. Sometimes though that unpredictability is annoying and brings challenges, but most of the time it's about constant new opportunities and unexpected challenges, creative challenges for clients. I have to say, as managing director, I see my role as taking away a lot of the boring corporate stuff from the people who really do make the difference, the talented designers and creative people and strategic planners and UX designers, the team that we have who make all the content that we do for our clients. So a typical day for me can often be staring at spreadsheets or approving purchase orders or that stuff. But I think, more excitingly, just the sheer variety of projects that we get involved in is the thing that keeps us all coming in the mornings.
Fantastic. Can you name perhaps a person who's been a tremendous impact on you as a leader? Perhaps it's someone who's even been a mentor to you, and how that person's impacted your life?
It's a great question, and I could mention several, I guess, but I think the thing that would unite them is best characterised by a chap I worked with actually in Sydney, Australia. I was there for a few years earlier in my career, working for one of the big, most creative ad agencies in Australia. And he was called Reg Bryson, and he was my boss, basically. He was CEO of the agency. And he was very unusual in advertising because he was a strategic planner by background, and it's unusual for a strategic planner to rise to the ultimate role of CEO. Not unprecedented, but not that usual. And the agency was amusingly called the Campaign Palace. It was a legendary name in, I think, global advertising back then. It doesn't exist anymore, sadly. And it was a very creative agency with a very strong creative department and a strong creative culture. But Reg, as the CEO, had he cared passionately about doing the right thing for our clients. And by that I mean not just creating advertising that was creative, quote unquote, or award-winning, or recognised in our peer group, but advertising that was genuinely effective and demonstrably worked. And a phrase he used a lot was, we have to be masters of the theory of our own subject, excuse the accent, but we have to understand why we do what we do and how it works. And he was dogged and passionate and relentless, actually, in terms of how we could prove that what we did was the way it was. And that's always influenced me, and I've always tried to apply that philosophy here at RedBee. Whether we do that on a daily basis, I hope we do, but that's that sense of not settling for something that is subjectively a creative piece of work, but really understanding how it works and whether it's a brand identity for a TV channel, or whether it's a campaign to support a sports sponsorship for Nissan, understanding why we do what we do and understanding how to measure it and demonstrate its effectiveness.
Fantastic. Employee engagement is critical to the success of any business. So what are you doing at RedBee from the top to keep your employees engaged?
I think the best way to answer that is to talk about something we're very proud of that happened a few months ago, which, if I'm allowed to mention a rival publication or outlet, Broadcast Magazine run a thing called The Best Places to Work in TV. And we thought a few months ago, well, wouldn't it be fantastic if RedBee could qualify as one of the best places to work in TV? What do we have to do to get that accolade? Well, actually, we have to subject ourselves to an extremely rigorous evaluation process involving us filling in a questionnaire about all the things we do for our staff, from eco policies to training to career progression. But even more importantly, a confidential online questionnaire that all of our employees filled in. And I must say we were a little bit daunted by that because we didn't know what to expect. And the questionnaire covers a range of things from our culture, so the things we care about, the fact that we look after each other, we help people develop and fulfill their potential and so on, the communication that we managed to achieve, so sharing a clear vision of what we're trying to achieve as a business, giving everybody regular updates, our values, diversity. Just as an aside, and there's a lot of talk about gender equality these days, and over 50% of people at RedBee are women, and we have a 50-50 split on the management team, which is pretty unusual. And a long list, really. And we were really delighted to have qualified as, in that grouping of, I think, 20 companies that were deemed to be the best places to work in TV. So I think there's no simple answer to that question of how do you keep employees engaged, because I think it's the combination of a lot of things that you do every day that you're committed to build an authentic culture. Mm-hmm. I think one other thing quickly is something I read a while ago that really stuck in my head was from a book by a chap called Richard Florida called The Rise of the Creative Class. And he looked at, I think there was a quantitative survey amongst creative people, and the question was, what matters most to you about your job? And where do you think money came on that list? It was actually the fourth most important thing, and by far the most important factor amongst creative people was challenge, closely followed by flexibility. So they were saying that the survey suggested that creative people are driven generally first and foremost by having exciting projects, and projects that challenge them and stretch them and that see the light of day, and by their variety. So I think, again, to answer your question, what we try to do here at RedBee is recognise that and give people as many creative opportunities as we possibly can, and make those opportunities as diverse as they can possibly be. So our diet of work is not just predictable and regular.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing business leaders today?
I think having two children who are now in their early 20s and looking at the millennials who work here at RedBee, I think that there's a real challenge in a change in attitude amongst the generations of people who are now entering, who are leaving university or college or school and starting to work. And the way I'd explain that would be, but I've observed anyway, they have a very different, much more fluid, much more dynamic approach to the way their careers or their working lives develop. Mm-hmm. They're much less inclined to commit to working for a business for a long time. They're much more, they seem to be motivated by different things. And I think one of the strongest things that in any creative business you need is a core culture and a core team of people. And I think a big challenge is how do you achieve that at a time when you've got a much more fluid and flexible workforce with a different set of attitudes. I think we manage that pretty well here, but it's not easy to make work.
What do you think is the best, or what was the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I think if I can answer that question with another quote, it's just something that has stuck in my mind since my early 20s, really. And it's not a piece of business advice I got from a colleague or a boss. It's just a quote from, funnily enough, from F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it's in a book of essays called The Crack Up. And he said that the test, so I'm not sure if I'll get the words right, but along the lines of the test of a first-rate intelligence is to keep two opposed views in mind at the same time, mm-hmm. and still retain the ability to function. And that really struck a chord with me, because I think to talk about our business and a creative business specifically, I think you have to have two opposing views in mind at the same time. One is, to do what we do, I think you have to have a sense of obsession and perfectionism, and you have to strive for the best possible work. That sometimes can create tension. You have to have a love of the craft. You have to be determined to find the right solutions. But at the same time, I think it's also important for your sanity and your health to remember that actually what we do is relatively unimportant. Mm-hmm. And therefore you can't really take yourself too seriously. You can't take the business too seriously. You can't put too much pressure on people. And I think that those twin, those polar opposite forces can be difficult to manage. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to be an effective leader, particularly in the creative industry. I think, we live in a polarised world, don't we? And particularly for those of us who spend time on social media, you find you exist in a bit of a bubble, in an echo chamber. I mean, take Brexit, for example. We've spent the last 2 years as a nation debating Brexit, and it's forced us to adopt positions, hasn't it? We're mm-hmm. either leavers or remainers, or remoaners, or we're expected to take a position, one or the other. And I think I, like many, many people, I feel 60-40 about that issue. And I think you have to, going back to the Scott Fitzgerald quote, you have to have the ability to see 2 points of view and still, as he says, maintain the ability to function.
Andy, what's the one mistake you witness leaders making more frequently than others, in your humble opinion?
I think the biggest mistake of all is, and I've worked with some of these people, is making it all about them. And I think maybe it's because as you're developing your leadership skills, and none of us are born perfect leaders, it's something you learn as you go. You tend to think that you have to create a plan, and the plan is to do things this way, and you're the leader, and you have to show people the direction and talk about how it's going to work. And I think there's a very difficult balance between being clear and decisive, and in my experience people do want direction. Even wayward creative people actually quite like the discipline and the rigour of a process. But at the same time, not making it all about you, and not not becoming too authoritarian, and so embracing other opinions and being open-minded and not being too fixed in your point of view. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, we have a Swedish parent company, and we've had for the last 3 years, and I've learned quite a lot. It's the first exposure I've had to Swedish business culture, and they have a very consensus-based management style, and that can also tip over into problems, because sometimes you get what's called a Swedish yes, which is sort of yes no at the same time, and so often you find people won't be decisive and won't give clear direction. So I think, again, going back to the paradox of that Scott Fitzgerald talked about, it's managing those two things. But I think that the biggest mistake is thinking that it's all about you, and it's all about what you think. It can be a very narrow-minded way to run a team, I guess.
Following up from that a little bit, what's perhaps the one behaviour trait that you've seen derail more leaders' careers?
I think it's actually, without being lazy, it's the same answer, really. I think, again, particularly in a creative... I often think people who work in the creative industries are like the kids at school who used to always run to the back of the bus when they went to the swimming class or whatever. They tend to be the ones who generally, I'm generalising horribly here, but those who don't particularly like to conform and who find it quite difficult to be straitjacketed in the corporate culture. Mm-hmm. And so I think trying to be a kind of stereotypical corporate leader in that environment can be very problematic. Yeah, in my experience.
How do you see? Your industry's going through massive change at the moment. But how do you see it changing in the future? And how do you think it may affect your ability to attract and retain the best talent?
There's so much I could say about our industry in the future, and every time I click on a headline, I'm reading about more changes and more big global takeovers, big media organisations buying each other, and the obvious things to mention that do clearly have an effect on us at RedBee are the explosion in availability of content, the fact that we now have on-demand video services, streaming services that are commissioning multi-billion-dollar original productions. Yeah. John Landgraf, who's a highly respected CEO of FX Networks in the US, talks about peak TV, and his network is one of the most respected for creating amazing shows like American Horror Story and Sons of Anarchy and so on. If he's already saying there's too much TV or there's too much good scripted drama, then I think we are running into a situation where and in some ways for RedBee and for companies like us, it's great because that competition creates demand, because fundamentally everyone's looking for an audience. Mm-hmm. And there's only so much available time to watch TV content or video content. What we're finding also with our non-media clients, like the likes of Nissan, for example, is that they're creating content that has to compete in that environment. So for us, it's that the changes are exciting and present lots of new opportunities. I guess from a leadership point of view, the challenge is how do you bring people with you and develop and evolve and sustain a core culture? Again, when you've got certainly a new generation of people who have a much more fluid and flexible attitude to the workplace and the way they want their careers to unfold. Again, managing that fluidity, but at the same time creating a core culture is the balance that we have to strike.
If you perhaps had your time again and were giving your 20-year-old self advice, what's the one thing you'd say?
That's a really, really difficult question. But I think I would probably say that I would try to live in the moment more and try to spend less time planning. I was always a planner of the next step and the next step, and it never worked out quite the way that you think it will. And I think now I'm lucky enough to have the chance to run a business. On a weekly basis, you learn that actually the best laid plans often things never turn out the way you think they're going to turn out. And I think it's hard because as a leader, you I think you're conditioned to thinking that you have to be the one that sets the direction. You do. You have to be the one who says, we're going to go this way and follow me, and this is the strategy, and this is how we're going to grow our business. But at the same time, so therefore you grow up thinking that being passive and almost fatalistic is completely wrong, that you have to somehow control it. But I think life has a way of showing you that there's very little you can control, really. And so I think it would have served me well to have learned that lesson a few years ago, and just to be, otherwise you can drive yourself mad with frustration at outcomes that don't quite work the way you want them to. And I think being more flexible is the key to it.
Andy, thank you so much for sharing so many insights into yourself and your thinking in the business. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to get in touch with yourself or RedBee?
The best way to reach RedBee is via our website, redbeecreative.com. On Twitter, we're simply RedBee Creative, and I'm Andy Bryant 1.